Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. NATO members gather in Brussels to discuss Ukraine peace plans as US negotiators fail to achieve a breakthrough with Putin. Meanwhile, the French president travels to Beijing to discuss the ongoing conflict as well as trade ties with China's President Xi. And Israel announced the Rafah crossing will open in the coming days, allowing Gazans to enter Egypt in accordance with the ceasefire agreement. Now, NATO foreign ministers are in Brussels today as they discuss ongoing peace talks to end the war in Ukraine. Last night, US negotiators failed to achieve a breakthrough with Russia's President Vladimir Putin on the Trump-backed deal. The Kremlin say Putin has not rejected the proposal and the talks were merely the first exchange of opinions. Here's what NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte had to say earlier.
We all want the bloodshed to end, and I strongly welcome President Trump's continued efforts to bring about a just and lasting peace. And as negotiations proceed, we cannot waver in our commitment to Ukraine. We are delivering essential, lethal and non-lethal US capabilities, including desperately needed air defense. And today, we heard from allies who are committing more resources to support Ukraine through Pearl, including Canada, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway and Poland. And this means that allies and partners have already committed now really over $4 billion. Ukraine continues to show incredible resilience. Putin believes he can outlast us, but we are not going anywhere.
To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Al Arabiya Editor Wissam Keyrouz, who's in Riyadh, and broadcaster and journalist Isabel Webster, who joins us all the way from Surrey. Wissam, let's start with you, actually. We're going to kick off the show with a question to you. What do we know about the talks between Russia and the US that happened yesterday in Moscow?
Well, let's start by saying these were very high-stake meetings in Moscow. It's a lengthy meeting that stayed for almost 5 hours, which gives a little bit of an idea about how important it was. No agreement has been reached, although we have very recently, a few minutes ago, the White House saying it was a very positive meeting. No agreement has been reached. Core issues remain in a deadlock. And when we talk about core issues, we are talking mostly about how much of the Ukrainian land will be not under Ukraine direct control. Now, why is that happening? We all know that Russia feels somehow emboldened by battlefield gains. Russia was not only using these battlefield gains as leverage in the meeting and the talks, but also it is bragging about these gains and saying it is winning 2 villages every day. Now, we can see, obviously, that the Americans and the Russians are more at ease into engaging directly. You know, we have a direct line between Washington and Russia, which is a bad news for NATO, a bad news for the Europeans. Washington is much more eager into getting this done through a direct channel with the Russians. And Europe and Ukraine remain very skeptical about what's happening. So let's see. We all know that Trump government, they are all very keen on having somehow results that nurture the narrative of Trump making at last a peace in Ukraine.
And Isabel, Wissam mentioned Europe there, and today we have seen the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. He's been speaking, saying that they will stand by Ukraine. It's been a lot of diplomacy happening in the last couple of weeks to try and push a deal over the line. As Wissam said, we still haven't got one. Russia hasn't agreed to anything. But does Europe really feel like it's on the back foot at the moment, especially because at these NATO talks, we can see that family photo being played out right now, and Marco Rubio wasn't there from the US.
This is true, and he absolutely should have been. But to be fair, Marco Rubio himself has been sidelined from a lot of the Ukraine-Russia negotiations, with Steve Witkoff, the special envoy, being the favoured representative of Donald Trump. Look, Europe has quite clearly been sidelined by the United States, is my belief in this. The 28-point surrender plan, which was hugely skewed in favour of Russia and was seemingly okayed by America initially, says it all, really. And this meeting of foreign ministers in Brussels today has been hugely important. Mark Rutte giving a demonstration of what true diplomacy looks like. Undoubtedly, he must find some of the key players in all of this hugely frustrating, and yet he makes platitudes and tries to find common ground. And he is absolutely right that Donald Trump has that capacity to break the deadlock, a unique capacity to do it. Whether or not he can be trusted to do that is another matter, and whether or not he will do it with the right implications, i.e., I've said before on this program, I worry that he would be looking for opportunities to make himself and his closest aides richer rather than in the interests of international law or the right thing morally. But that being said, there was big progress made in Europe, as Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, was saying. 2/3 of NATO members now pledging to invest in American weapons, lethal and non-lethal. And we're also seeing progress on that attempt to turn off the taps forever, as they describe, to really wean Europe's dependence off Russian oil and gas. And, we've made huge progress on that, down from 45% of all of our sources of that was from Russia at the start of the war, down to 12% at the most recent count. So we're making progress. You can't turn those taps off at the, whim, because these things take time and we have to find alternative sources for energy. And let's also not forget that the rise of populism and isolationism is sweeping across the West, and you have countries like Italy, but also we know that the rise of the far right in France, and we're seeing it in this country as well, put pressure on governments to look within their own nations and to avoid perhaps some of these more serious geopolitical crises facing us. And the reality is the cost of living crisis and all of this is escalating out of control and making it very unpopular to invest more money into NATO and to turn off the taps and try and generate, because effectively it will see bills going up, at least in the short term. So, we've seen Italy's Meloni coming out and saying she won't be contributing at the moment to this plan to buy American weapons to support Ukraine. So there are those challenges at home. But overall, Europe is doing everything it can, with Ursula von der Leyen as well, working very hard to try and secure those Russian assets that have been seized through sanctions and to funnel those back into Ukraine as reparations. And there have been some progress on that as well today.
And it's really interesting, Wissam, because a lot of people have criticised Europe and also the NATO countries the whole way through this war. They've said they've just acted too late. They've been too late to the game. And we do hear today, as Isabel said, 2/3 of NATO countries are actually committed to this Pearl program, which will help buy weapons from the US for Ukraine. Over $4 billion committed. But this is, one, not enough money for Ukraine. They could possibly run out of funds by February. And where have Europe been for 4 years?
Well, not only that, I agree with what you're saying, but also very important countries in Europe have been importing Russian energy in the midst of this war. Having said this, I really believe that the right thing to do is first and foremost to end the war, because keeping the war going is only taking us to a very unclear outcome. Let's say that, I'm not contesting the aggressor versus victim narrative that has been the main headline in Europe for the last 3-4 years. But I think the world and America thinks that anything that comes from Europe now that is making this deal more difficult to achieve is kind of sabotage. This is what the deep Trumpian feeling says. At the same time, I personally believe that this narrative of aggressor victim, which is legitimate, is not productive right now. The West has to really understand, redefine the relation with Russia. Russia is here to stay. The Russian system or regime is not changing. So what do we do to live with that and to put the right guarantees not to have more aggressions? Now, the narrative that has been ruling the game in the last 4 years under Biden has only led to sustain the war. Putin has been gaining more and more territory. This strategy has not achieved a lot. The right strategy is to re-engage Russia in a broader West and a broader set of values that both sides can live with and can work with. How will that happen? I think this is a big challenge for Europe, and I think that Russia believes it holds the upper hand now, both militarily and diplomatically, making it unlikely to settle for anything less than maximalist demands, unfortunately. How do we go from there? There's an absence of breakthrough for now, but there is also a will, and there is these talks that reflect a strategic pivot by US to be ready to engage directly with Russia, despite the strong objection from Europe and mostly from Ukraine.
It's such a complicated situation, and like we have been discussing, so much diplomacy happening, and sometimes we don't seem to be getting forward with these talks. But thank you so much for your analysis and thoughts on that. Let's move on to another story now. And French President Emmanuel Macron has arrived in China for his fourth state trip to the country. The visit comes as Europe looks to counter economic and security threats from Beijing, a critical supplier of rare earths during a time of trade turmoil. Isabel, let's start with you, because right now Emmanuel Macron isn't the most popular person at home in France. So how significant is this visit for Macron right now?
Yes, well, there are those people who make the same claims about Prime Minister Keir Starmer here in the United Kingdom, that he heads abroad whenever things are getting a little bit tricky at home. And certainly the international stage is a good place for leaders to go to really build a bit of leverage for their country, for their reputation. And we know that Macron is beleaguered at home. He's got deadlock in his parliament. He's got collapsing approval ratings, cost of living crisis, rise of the far right, all the familiar issues. After 7 years in power, he's less popular than ever. So can he change that in China, this 3-day state visit? Well, certainly he'll be hoping so. And there are deals to be made, and he wants them to be reciprocal. And it is interesting to note that there have been bumps on the road between the two nations in recent years over things like pork and brandy from the Chinese side, and from the French side, there have been objections to Chinese electric vehicles. There was some progress made on cognac back in July. I note that France is the biggest exporter of wine and spirits to China. It's a huge market for them. So if Macron
until
can
China
come back
makes its own wine, Isabel.
Yes, this is true. Well, I know China wants to grow their wine sort of heritage, but they've got a long way to go before they can compete with the French. But it's worth pointing out that, of course, also there's a huge market in China for luxury goods, which, of course, we know the French are really historically known as sort of being the founder of, whether we're talking about Moet or Louis Vuitton or whatever it might be, Chanel. There is a huge appetite and demand for that French luxury. So there are deals to be struck. He's not just there, though, to try and shore up deals whilst he's there. He's also there to talk about the previous issue we've just been discussing, because on Monday in Paris, Macron met with Zelensky, and he is keen to try to encourage China to continue, because they have recently been putting pressure on Russia to accept the ceasefire deal, and he will be lobbying there as well to try and broker peace in his own way.
Wissam, let's come to you, because Isabel did mention there bumps in the road between Europe and China of late. We have seen that. But what does this actually mean for Europe? And how closely is Washington going to be watching Macron's visit to China?
Allow me to start with a word about the man, about Emmanuel Macron. I don't recall any personality of this stature who has been that brilliant outside, at least under the spotlight, and that shrinking in his own country. This has been the legacy of Emmanuel Macron, being everywhere outside, on every front, really a deal maker, or someone who is part of the story and who has been so unpopular, facing all the wrong, unfortunate events internally. Now, having said this, I would like to recall an anecdote, a story that has been told by ex-French Prime Minister Jean-Pierre Rafah, who said that he met one day the Chinese President Hu Jintao, who told him, "You French and European, you have to cooperate with us because one day, I mean, we work more than you do, and one day we'll have to cooperate, or we will not need to cooperate with you because we'll be able to achieve whatever we want." Now, having said this, now Emmanuel Macron, does he have any leverage with China? I think he still has some leverage, as Europe mostly and as France also. He has the access to a massive, wealthy consumer market. We are talking about the European market. This is where he is playing his what we can call the BBD, the booze and bags diplomacy. It has been a great card for himself, but he also has, Europe has control over advanced technologies and it has also the diplomatic legitimacy, and also has control over some very, very niche technologies like aviation and pharmaceutical. Now Macron is putting Europe and trying to insert Europe and a new love triangle that is being created on a world scale. You have America, China, and Russia. America trying to engage China to push Russia into a Ukraine deal, and also America trying to win Russia into the broader face or confrontation with China. And China is being a major player in those. And Europe, through Macron, trying to be part of this love triangle with not very much of, great prospects for now.
Yeah, it's really interesting how you describe it as a love triangle between three countries right now, and France is trying to get involved. But, Isabel, if we think about France and the leverage that they had, we were talking about booze and bags, and that was what Wissam was saying. They also have pandas, so there's a lot going on for China too. We must remember that. And a whole lot of deals are expected to be signed. But France and Europe have described the European Union, China as a partner, competitor, and systematic rivals. So there's still that underlying tension between China and France.
Yeah, but there's a lot more to be gained from the two countries working together. And, the nature of whether it's, bags and booze diplomacy or, geopolitical diplomacy, talking is always beneficial, I believe. And, both countries, France and China, are hosting key summits next year. France is hosting the Group of Seven summit, and China's hosting the APEC forum. And if the two countries have had this bilateral and it's been a success, and they've had this state visit, they'll be in a strong position at both of those forums when their representatives from opposite countries come. So it's smart leadership, a smart move from Macron, and if he can translate that into some sort of boost to his economy, then he'll, it's mutually beneficial to both countries. So fingers crossed, more of us can work together in this way, in a cooperative and a trustworthy way, because China obviously has a history of being untrustworthy, particularly when it comes to spies. In this country, we've had a huge problem with that. So, you have to do it with your eyes wide open. This isn't the golden era, but there certainly needs to be, they're a huge economy, and it would be foolish to ignore them.
Thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Now let's move on to another story. Israel says a Rafah crossing will be opened in the coming days to let Gazan residents cross into Egypt as part of the ceasefire deal. An Israeli official has said all Palestinians will be able to exit through Rafah as long as Egypt agrees to accept them. The route has been sealed off since May 2024 and was temporarily opened in February this year to evacuate the sick and also the wounded. Wissam, actually, this is a big moment. How crucial is this reopening in practical terms for civilians trapped in Gaza? And why has Israel made this decision now?
Well, in practical terms, it is the only practical exit for thousands of trapped civilians in Gaza. Will it be the great floods of humans leaving the strip? We don't think so, mostly because Egypt will not allow it. But also this move by Israel, it will enable urgent medical evacuation that Gaza needs so much. And this is mostly under medical headline right now. And of course, it will reduce immediate humanitarian pressure on Gaza and on people who are really living with almost nothing inside. Now, Israel is also strengthening its negotiating leverage because it is somehow relieving a little bit the pressure that has been mounting on Israel recently. Israel has been listening some unfamiliar things from America recently, like Donald Trump telling Benjamin Netanyahu very clearly, you don't sabotage what I have achieved on the peace front, and you don't also mess with Syria, because this is something important and it's happening under my leadership. So somehow reopening Rafah will lead to a bit less of pressure on Israel, who has been really ready for war for the last 2-3 years, and it is struggling to put down this readiness to be, fighting all the time. Now, being back to civilians, will we see civilian flooding? I don't think so, because Egypt will not allow it, because this is so strategic for Egypt not to allow it, because also the area around Rafah is one of the most militarized areas in the world right now. Is it a zero risk? No. But also there is people in Israel, unfortunately, who still believe that opening, I'm not talking about the government here, people who still believe that opening Rafah would somehow allow people to get out and accomplish within the ceasefire what couldn't have been achieved with the war, which is, pushing out hundreds of thousands of people. This is what some people in Israel think is still possible by not allowing reconstruction, but by not allowing enough humanitarian aid, and by opening the borders to Egypt.
And Isabel, what does this actually mean in a broader context when it does come to the ceasefire in Gaza? We have spoken before about how fragile it is and how difficult it has been to implement.
Yeah, I think if we see the Rafah crossing opening, then it will be a really positive sign. I think it can be used really as a barometer of the momentum of the ceasefire. This isn't something that can be done unilaterally. It takes cooperation from multiple countries, Egypt, Gaza, Israel, and of course all of the nations with humanitarian workers as well having a stake in that. So if it is successful, we don't know the timeline on when that could be. It is a good thing, but let's not forget that since the 10th of October, there have been some enormous number of violations, I think nearly 600 violations by Israel. There's been continued bloodshed and loss of life. We've also seen the return of hostages over the weekend, the remains of hostages, and Israel accusing Hamas of returning false remains, that they aren't the hostages that were taken in 2023. That has the potential to derail any progress on all of this. So I think, we're sort of waiting with our hearts in our mouths in all of this. It's been an incredibly long time. I think it was May 2024, the last time the Rafah crossing was properly open. It was a brief interlude back in February when there was a brief peace ceasefire then. But, the World Health Organization point to the fact that there are in excess of 16,000 civilians who are either wounded or incredibly sick who need to get out of Gaza. So, there are good reasons to open it. It should have been opened a long time ago, but it is a barometer, I suppose, is your question about, what are the wider symbols from this? And it's, whether or not this is a lasting peace. And I sincerely hope that we will see progress on that in the next few days.
But it's really interesting, Isabel and Wissam, because we're talking about the Rafah crossing opening, and we're also talking about people being allowed into Egypt, from the Gaza Strip, but they will still have to be vetted by Israel, and they will still have to get clarification from them if they can move, and Egypt still has to agree to accept them. So it's not as straightforward as people just being able to leave the country at all.
There's actually only few people who will be allowed to leave. I mean, we have to emphasize on this. These are not open borders. Mm-hmm. This is a humanitarian opening, especially based on medical needs. And, one of the greatest, fears that Egypt has is to see hundreds of thousands of people leaving Gaza into Egypt. And this has been why Egypt has been so keen on not opening, this border. It's not against the people of Gaza, but it's about not letting Israel achieve what it thinks it wants to achieve, which is, emptying Gaza from its people.
Thank you so much for your thoughts on that, Wissam and Isabel. Let's move on now. And President Trump has told reporters he does not want Somali immigrants in the United States, and they should go back to where they came from. Speaking during a cabinet meeting, the US president said America would go the wrong way if they kept taking garbage into the country. It comes as ICE officers prepare to crack down in Minnesota, which is home to a large Somali community. Here's more of what President Trump had to say.
With Somalia, which is barely a country, they have no anything. They just run around killing each other. There's no structure. I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you, okay? Somebody would say, oh, that's not politically correct. I don't care. I don't want them in our country. Their country's no good for a reason. Their country stinks. We could go one way or the other, and we're going to go the wrong way if we keep taking in garbage into our country. These aren't people that work. These aren't people that say, let's go, come on, let's make this place great. These are people that do nothing but complain. Let them go back to where they came from and fix it.
Isabel, strong rhetoric there coming from President Donald Trump yesterday. It's been condemned by officials, hasn't it?
Yeah, we don't want garbage coming into this country. They've got plenty of it in their own country. A lot of people would argue. Look, we talked a moment ago about Mark Rutte, who's on the international stage using words that he's chosen incredibly carefully. And that is the kind of leadership that we expect those who are running countries, heads of state to use. And to hear the President of the United States, who may have some point about the fact that Somalia is a hugely troubled, war-ridden country after decades of conflict where there is enormous human suffering, and it is addled with problems, yes. But the language that he used is damaging, racist, hurtful, offensive, unhelpful, and as a result, unsurprisingly, has been hugely condemned, not least by Somali leaders in the two cities in Minnesota, which has the largest Somali community outside of the country itself. And there have been concerns and reports that ICE, this aggressive operation of removing foreigners from the United States, were planning big raids on Somali communities. They haven't been stood up, but there have been reports of a handful of such raids over the last few days. And so we've heard from the mayor of Minneapolis and St. Paul coming out and condemning the language of the president. And we've also heard from representatives of the Somali community expressing their concern. And, you know, just to dehumanize an entire group of people, it's not different from the way the president, you know, refers to people based on their gender or the color of their skin and writes them off, you know, with these sweeping statements. And it's disappointing, but not unsurprising.
And Wissam, were you surprised by the language that Donald Trump used towards the community in Somalia who were living in the United States? Because like Isabel said, it was very strong language and in some ways definitely not helpful.
Well, let's say that political correctness is long dead since Trump came to power, not only 2 years ago, 1 year ago, but from 2017. Now, this language is, of course, offensive, but it's mostly also unheard of in the world of politics when the president of one big nation almost withdraws the very fact that countries should acknowledge the existence of themselves and at the very least keep a certain way of talking politically. But now Trump is Trump. Having said this, I think this is a moment where Trump is really confused between, his political duties and his personal inner rage and feelings against some people. And I can mostly think about what he feels about Ilhan Omar. Ilhan Omar, for him, is a person who really embodies the revolt of some of the Americans who come from immigration, who in his sense are against what America is about. She comes with her veil, with her background, very, very proud about her political ideas, very proud about, being against the president, not showing enough gratitude in his sense towards the American generosity of making her American. Now, this is not only Trump, unfortunately. This is a huge wave of people who think this way in the Trumpian field. And yes, Somalia is a big problem for the world. And yes, Somalia is an issue that has been going on for the last 40 years. But, do we really need to hear a president who say this about a country? It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. And I think it's going to go further very soon. Now, we are not talking only about Somalia. We are talking about stopping maybe the naturalization or giving the citizenship process for a lot of people. It's a human drama for many people now in America, and it's also a trauma for many people who fear that their path into citizenship will be stopped maybe very soon.
And Isabel, we have seen a real shift in Donald Trump's language, and it appears to come after that shooting that happened in Washington, D.C., which did target the 2 U.S. guards who were on the streets. And Donald Trump has seemed to have come out stronger than ever against immigration, and that rhetoric does seem to be building in the United States. How dangerous is it, or do you think Donald Trump's just playing into his MAGA base?
Well, let's not forget that his criticism of the Somali community actually began when he was campaigning for his first term as president, when he complained about huge fraud and, has very much had resentment towards the Somali community ever since. There is a growing racist tone to his rhetoric, and there is also a growing disgust to it. We've heard Sabrina Carpenter coming out and condemning the use of her music in a White House video. We've seen Trump terminating temporary protected status for Somalis in the last week. And as you were saying, this concern that the number of countries that are already subjected to travel bans could suddenly be upped to 30. And there's this sort of pause in all those people being naturalized. So, it's a really unsettling time for anyone that's not white and born in the United States, I think. Let's not forget that a generation ago, Trump himself was an immigrant. His mother was Scottish. I do think that it's interesting how there is a certain colour of immigration that is acceptable in certain echelons of right-leaning thinking, and I do think that needs to be said out loud. I think that America has a lot of problems coming down the road if their leader is openly racist and not called out for it by his own team and those people closest to him.
Wissam, what's the end goal?
I do believe that J.D. Vance has been asked about has been asked the very question that Isabel just asked, which is America itself is a country of immigrants. Trump himself is a descendant of German and Scottish grandparents, like Isabel said. And J.D. Vance said, yes, we are a nation of immigrants, but we should not remain that way forever. Having said this, I do believe that countries do have the right to put their rules about who to let in, who not to let in. This is a right, and any country has also the right to say that I need to protect my borders, to protect my culture. This is somehow seen as so not politically correct, or is not liberal enough, but this is what many people in the West think right now, because immigration has been so massive in a way that has not let the immigrants integrate in the right way. Because when we let people massively in, I know what I'm saying is a little bit controversial. When you let people massively in, you allow them to be what they are and not to integrate enough with the values or the culture of the country. Having said this, it's also a very common way of going around things. When you have problems elsewhere, you always tend to blame the weakest. You always tend to blame the foreigner. Now, whenever the economy is going well, it's less about an immigration problem. Of course, what happened near the White House a couple of weeks ago was very detrimental and kicking on this new rhetoric of, against the immigrants, because we had this victim, this 20-year-old victim, who was member of the National Guard, who was killed. She was the perfect victim. She was white. She was 20 years old. She was covering the shift of a colleague for Thanksgiving. And on the other hand, you had one Afghani man who benefited, who worked for the CIA, who came with the CIA, and who somehow decided to kill civil servants. Now, we can unfortunately expect that this rhetoric is not going to end soon. It's going to be part of the next few years in America.
And it's interesting because that rhetoric that you're talking about has been spoken more and more about, even in European countries. In France, you mentioned earlier, Isabel. In the UK too, we see the rise of the Reform Party, and people are saying, Wissam, repeating what you said there, that immigration and the volume of immigration has been something difficult for governments to get a grip of. But thank you so much.
But we have to agree that immigration is a problem. I mean, I'm not talking in a right-wing way, but the issue of immigration is one of the biggest problem facing the West. At least it is one big question that everyone is talking about.
And I think that, Isabel, you would agree with that. And I think that every single government has tried to get a grip of it, and they just can't seem to.
I think this country that I'm in would collapse without immigration. Most of our institutions are supported by a high-level and low-level immigration. I think the problem with illegal immigration is enormous and a huge challenge and hugely unpopular. But I think the rise of the right has massively inflated and decided to blame immigrants for most of the problems that we have right across the West. And I think it's straight out of the sort of fascist playbook, and we should all be very, very alarmed by it.
Thank you so much for your thoughts on that story, Isabel and Wissam. Now it's that time of the show where Isabel and Wissam have chosen two of their quirkiest stories of the day, a little bit more light-hearted. And Isabel, let's start with you and a raccoon that's been found in a bathroom, allegedly drunk.
Oh, well, here's my punchline. You gave away my secret there. I was going to play on how we've been talking about the behavior of these, terrible, audacious people all evening. But this is reports of a masked burglar broke into a liquor store in Virginia, had an absolute riot on the bottom floor, smashing into the whiskey bottles and the scotch, getting filthy drunk, and then found completely passed out in the bathroom the next day by a member of staff. And it wasn't a human intruder, as you said there, Leigh-Ann, it was indeed a raccoon. He apparently fell through a loose ceiling tile and was then taken to an animal shelter, who did a sort of full medical on him. And I'm pleased to say they didn't find any injuries, but they said that he did show signs of suffering a serious hangover. I
must say something. I'm just looking at that picture, and I feel like it's not that glamorous for the poor raccoon, is it? Found on the bathroom floor.
We've all been there.
Yeah, more than once, you know. I do feel like, so we know the raccoon's well. Not the most glamorous picture, bless him, but he's there, he's alive. Wissam.
He had a good time.
Yeah.
He had a very good time. I think that the alcohol will let him be a little bit happier, and maybe he will need some time off. But it's a great story, actually, very lighthearted.
I wonder if he was on the French wine or the Chinese wine. Unfortunately, he won't be able to give us an answer, I'm sure. But
maybe on some North American alcohol of any kind.
I have no idea what they drink there. But maybe the raccoon does. But
what's the Jack Daniels, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
JD and Coke, maybe. Anyway, Wissam, let's talk about yours, because it's no one lying on the floor after a heavy night out, but it's another really strange thing. A man swallowing a stolen egg worth $19,000. I mean, I don't know what's worse, ending up on the bathroom floor swallowing an egg.
Well, Isabel's story was about a raccoon drinking alcohol, which is pretty unfamiliar. My story is much more familiar until we get into the details. It's about a man who ate an egg. Till now, it's fine, but when we talk about what kind of egg, it's a Fabergé egg. It's basically jewelry. It's a $19,000 valued egg. It happened in New Zealand. The man was trying to steal the object. He is a 32-year-old man who was trying to steal this object, which was made a few years ago. It's not the historical Fabergé eggs, which, by the way, would have cost much, much more. It's a 18 karat gold with 60 white diamonds, 15 blue sapphire, and the guy found that the best way to get away with stealing this egg is to swallow it. He has been taken to hospital because he was immediately arrested. Now, having said this, if he wanted to get away with a much bigger egg with a bigger value, who would have thought about an egg who has just been sold for around more than $10 million, which is also a very important Russian art object. A word about these eggs made by Fabergé, a Swiss-French jeweler who was in Russia, who was working for the Russian imperial family, and most of the historical eggs were made for specific imperial family occasions, like the emperor commissioning an egg for his mother, for his wife, for his daughter, and these eggs are some of the most important and valued objects that have ever been created in Russia, and that symbolizes Russia. This egg we have been talking about is part of the Fabergé brand, who has been revived, who is right now creating smaller objects. Maybe more people can buy these eggs now with these prices what we are talking about. Unfortunately, it is not it's under embargo in most of the Western world, especially in Europe.
But you know what I found fascinating? Like you did say a little bit earlier, a rare Fabergé egg sold for a record £22.9 million, and that was today. And it was decorated with 4,500 diamonds. It's just something, Isabel, that I would love for Christmas.
Well, I hope that Father Christmas, I hope you've been a good girl and that Father Christmas delivers on your wish. But this whole story, I mean, it's less glamorous, but it reminds me of a story that is true, that my mother gave her engagement ring to my brother when he was a toddler to distract him. My mum was busy trying to work, and she thought, what can I do to get him to be quiet? And he bloomin' swallowed her engagement ring. And she took him to hospital, and she has the X-ray of this engagement ring in his stomach. And I'm pleased to say it did pass through, and her engagement ring is back on her finger, and she wears it to this day. So, you know, this person, this 32-year-old chap's not the first man to swallow diamonds in the world, but there you go.
I'm sure the ring had a good clean, and it looks as good as new, Isabel, after
you know, Leigh-Ann, if you really wanted that egg for Christmas, it's a perfect Christmas gift. I'm talking about the egg that has been sold in auction today for $22 million, because it's the first time a Fabergé egg has been made with crystal, and it has been decorated for the first time with the ice or snowflake shape that we all know, that we see in, you know, in the cartoons and everywhere. It's the little triangles. It's the first time. It's a beautiful object, and it has been made with diamonds, but mostly it is so valued because of depicting the snow flakes or the snow crystals as we see them under the microscope.
I must say something. I don't know if I've been so good. Maybe I've had a little bit of raccoon behaviour, so maybe I'll have to...
It's cold for you and your stocking this year.
Yeah, it's going to be cold.
You can try harder next year and see if a Fabergé egg appears. Yeah.
Yes, let's hope so. But thank you so much to our guests, Al Arabiya editor Wissam Keyrouz and broadcaster and journalist Isabel Webster. And of course, that's all for us on W News Extra. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also follow us on X. Goodbye, and thank you so much for watching.